The call came while I was repairing a fence line in the South 40. Dad's voice carried that particular tremor that cuts through everything else. The doctors wanted to see him again, and the word soon told me everything I needed to know about what they'd found in his lungs. I'm Daniel Crawford. What I'm about to tell you is how a Seattle real estate attorney named Victoria Brennan tried to steal 47 acres of my family's land in Sandpoint, Idaho, while my father was dying of lung cancer. How she timed every move to exploit our grief, and how her arrogance ultimately destroyed her in ways she never imagined. This happened between November 2023 and July 2024. Every detail is real. Every document is filed with Bonner County, and by the time you finish reading this, you'll understand why sometimes the greatest revenge isn't prison time. It's watching your enemy live in the house they built on land they tried to steal. Dad moved into our guest bedroom the same week we got his diagnosis. Stage 4 lung cancer. Maybe 6 months? Dr. Richardson said, no negotiation with harvest schedules or the 1,000 things keeping a family timber operation running. The medical bills started arriving before we finished the first round of chemotherapy. $18,000 for 3 weeks of trying to buy time we couldn't afford. By January, the number had climbed to $43,000. By March, $68,000. I sold equipment that would have carried us through summer. Took loans against timber we hadn't cut yet. Stopped checking the mailbox unless absolutely necessary. That's when Victoria Brennan entered our story. I first saw her in February, stepping out of a silver Mercedes with Washington plates at the old Henderson property, the 30-acre parcel that bordered mine, where Tom Henderson had been talking about retirement since his wife passed. She wore a wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly expenses. Carried herself with confidence. You recognize if you've spent time around lawyers. Tall woman. Maybe 50-something. But the kind of presence that makes people instinctively defer to her judgment. Tom introduced her around town as a semi-retired attorney from Seattle, looking for a place to slow down and enjoy the Idaho lifestyle. Victoria seemed to fit right in. She asked thoughtful questions about water rights and timber values, showed up to the Rotary breakfast and the volunteer fire department fundraiser. She had a way of listening that drew people out, and she seemed particularly interested in the area's history. Old survey lines, boundary disputes going back to the 1890s, stories that old-timers loved to tell about how the land was divided. She bought the Henderson place in March, paid cash according to courthouse records, started talking about building a small cabin for visiting family. Nothing elaborate, just a place where her sister could stay and enjoy mountain air. She hired Ryan Mitchell's construction crew, local boys who knew their business. The county approved her building permits without fuss. Cabins aren't complicated projects, and Victoria's paperwork was thorough. Dad's condition worsened through spring, required round-the-clock care that made checking the far sections impossible. I hired Sarah Collins, a retired nurse who lived down the valley, to help during days when I had to handle timber operations. Sarah had gentle hands and patience that comes from shepherding people through their hardest moments. Victoria stopped by in early May, ostensibly to check on Dad and see if we needed anything. She brought a casserole, flowers, the kind of neighborly gesture that marks you as decent folk in Idaho. She sat in our kitchen for an hour, asking gentle questions about Dad's treatment, offering to help however she could. What struck me was how carefully she listened when Dad talked about the property, the way her eyes would sharpen when he mentioned old boundary lines or survey work done back in the 80s. Dad loved telling stories about the land, how his father had bought it from a railroad company widow, how they'd fought with the Forest Service over access roads, how the original survey had been done during a blizzard by a half-drunk county employee. Victoria seemed fascinated, asking follow-up questions about dates, measurements, names of surveyors involved. She mentioned her construction project was going well, said the cabin was taking shape nicely in the wooded area behind her main property. She seemed knowledgeable about local geography, mentioning old landmarks with casual familiarity. Around that time, I started noticing survey stakes with bright orange ribbons appearing along what I'd always thought were our property lines, professional-looking markers. The kind county crews use. I made mental note to ask about them next time I was in town. But between Dad's appointments and timber work, I couldn't postpone. That note got buried under 1,000 more urgent priorities. In late April, I began catching a low diesel rumble deep in the timber. The kind of sound that didn't belong to spring operations. I told myself it was county maintenance, or a logging crew on someone else's section. And I kept moving because every hour was already owned by medication schedules and hospital calls as May wore on. That noise stopped being occasional and became routine. Same time. Same steady confidence. Like someone had planted a clock in the trees and dared me to notice. I did notice, I just didn't have strength to chase it. I was sleeping in scraps, measuring time by doses and bills, trying to keep Dad comfortable while the operation bled money we didn't have. After we buried him in early June, the quiet in our house turned sharp, and the sound in the timber turned louder. In the first week of July, I walked the property line the way a man checks fence after a storm, looking for what might have shifted while I was trapped inside grief. That's when suspicion finally settled in my chest, cold and certain. Whatever was happening back there had been planned for exactly the season when I couldn't afford to pay attention. Victoria Brennan wasn't the kind of woman who left things to chance. While I was learning the crushing arithmetic of terminal illness morphine every 4 hours, bills arriving weekly, of hope measured in blood tests, she was conducting different mathematics entirely, the kind involving property lines, legal precedents, and precise language of Idaho adverse possession law. The first sign should have been the surveyor. Professional crew showed up at the Henderson place 3 weeks after Victoria closed on the property. Equipment cases and tripods suggesting work far more comprehensive than simple boundary confirmation. George Patterson, the 79-year-old retired county surveyor who'd originally mapped most of the area back in '83, mentioned it to Sarah Collins at the grocery store. Seemed unusual, he said, for someone to hire private surveyors right after buying property with clear title and established boundaries. But Victoria had explained it as due diligence, wanting to understand exactly what she'd purchased before making improvements. What George didn't know until later was that Victoria had specifically requested his original field notes from county archives. The surveying work he'd done in winter of '83 had been challenging. Heavy snow, sub-zero temperatures, equipment primitive by today's standards. George had noted several areas where natural landmarks made precise measurements difficult, including a section along the creek where my property bordered what was then Forest Service land. He'd flagged it in his report as possible discrepancy, requiring future verification. The kind of cautious language protecting surveyors from liability while acknowledging work limitations. Victoria studied those notes with attention of someone who understood that legal disputes often turn on technical details, seeming insignificant to everyone else. She'd spent 28 years practicing real estate law in Seattle, the kind of work where ownership can hinge on a sentence, a marker, a line drawn wrong decades ago. She understood that small gaps in old surveys could be turned into leverage if you wrapped them in clean paperwork and pushed at the right moment. Her real talent wasn't finding land, it was finding weakness. then presenting it as certainty, her research expanded to include every document related to my family's ownership, dating back to original railroad land grant in 1949. She pulled everything available through county clerk's office and attorney databases. Looking for any gap between legal description and physical reality, meanwhile, my world shrank to dimensions of hospital room. While I slept beside Dad's bed and let timber operations run on bare minimum, Victoria was quietly studying our deeds, boundaries, and every weakness in paper trail protecting Crawford land. She used this period to establish herself as respected community member. School board meetings, Rotary breakfast, historical society. She seemed genuinely interested in early settlement patterns and survey methodology, but our conversations weren't casual, they were reconnaissance, mapping who knew what about old survey lines and property disputes. In early April, Victoria filed paperwork requesting formal boundary verification, routine due diligence. She claimed. She hired firm from Coeur d'Alene with advanced GPS equipment. New survey revealed exactly what she hoped: discrepancy between legal description in my deed and physical markers established over decades. Difference was small, just over 2 acres, but created zone of uncertainty. According to GPS, boundary ran along creek bed. According to markers, in place 40 years. Boundary was 70 yards closer to my house, giving Victoria claim to strip, including best timber. What made her strategy clever was how she framed it. Rather than admitting she sought discrepancies to exploit, she presented herself as wanting absolute certainty before construction. People admired her thoroughness. During this same period, I was negotiating payment plans with medical facilities, selling equipment, learning end-stage cancer care. Timber work that couldn't wait took every hour I could spare from Dad's bedside. I hadn't walked back sections since before Christmas, hadn't paid attention to anything beyond immediate crisis radius. Sarah Collins handled our mail, sorting bills from correspondence. She received certified letters about neighboring property owner filing for boundary verification and construction permits approved near our property line. In chaos of managing Dad's care and financial collapse, these seemed like routine notifications. Permits were approved same day. I signed papers authorizing palliative care. Victoria received approval that afternoon. She'd already lined up Ryan's crew and ordered materials. What I didn't realize was that Victoria's months of research had just cleared way for construction on what she would claim was her property. Beginning of most sophisticated property theft I'd ever encountered. First concrete truck arrived Tuesday morning in early May, rumbling down Forest Road toward what I'd thought was public land. I was adjusting Dad's oxygen when sound reached us. Sarah frowned at intrusion into our carefully managed quiet. Victoria had timed construction beginning with precision, while I measured Dad's remaining time in increasingly small increments. She was coordinating materials and equipment for what would become most expensive theft in county history. Foundation work began immediately. From legal perspective, everything appeared legitimate, valid permits, certified surveys, title insurance. Ryan's crew had built dozens of mountain homes. Nothing seemed unusual except quality of materials and remote location. What Ryan couldn't know was that survey stakes used as reference had been placed according to Victoria's interpretation, not legal description in my deed. Foundation extended nearly 45 yards into Crawford property, encompassing meadow where my grandfather had built his hunting cabin. Construction moved with unusual speed. Victoria had pre-ordered materials, arranged expedited delivery, paid premium rates, She understood momentum matters in legal disputes as much as construction. Through May and early June, construction noise seeped into our days. Generator at 6 a.m. Saw blades at 8. Delivery trucks at noon. Dad commented only once during rare moment of clarity. Somebody's building something substantial back there. Hope they know where their property lines are. One of less coherent conversations we had. Medical bills continued accumulating. By late May, total debt reached $128,000. Sarah helped negotiate payment plans and arranged hospice care. Victoria stopped by during final weeks, with timing feeling considerate until examined closely. Stayed near kitchen doorway, asking when Sarah arrived, how often I drove to town, whether I'd been out to back property. Never said construction. Questions did work for her. By end of May, Dad was gone. Week following funeral passed in administrative blur. I signed papers, made arrangements, tried to process grief while managing financial obligations feeling insurmountable. It was during this period of emotional and financial exhaustion that I made my first ride into backcountry since before Christmas. I needed to check timber section anyway. Winter damage to access roads, possible problems with water systems, routine maintenance keeping operation functional. But mostly, I needed to reconnect with land that had raised 3 generations of my family. Find some sense of continuity in country that felt familiar even when everything else had changed. I saddled Ranger on clear morning in mid-June, packed basic tools and supplies, headed toward timber section where construction sounds had provided background soundtrack to Dad's final weeks. Ride through familiar country felt therapeutic. Return to physical work and outdoor perspectives after months of indoor crisis management. Aspens leafing out. Wildflowers beginning to show color. Seasonal renewal making Idaho summers feel like promises kept. Sound of generators and power tools grew steadily louder as I followed old logging road winding through dense timber toward what I'd always considered remote boundary of our property. Professional sounds, clearly not amateur weekend construction, but methodical work creating permanent structures. As I got closer, I could distinguish individual tools. Circular saws, pneumatic nailers, hydraulic whine of heavy equipment moving materials. Whatever was being built back there was substantial and expensive. Then, I saw it through trees, and everything I thought I understood about property lines and neighborly behavior collapsed into something simpler and more frightening. Rising above timberline was a luxury log home that belonged in Mountain Living magazine. Not on land that had been in my family since before Idaho was a state. This wasn't any cabin. This was primary residence, complete with wraparound decks, stone chimney rising 40 feet above roofline, and enough square footage to house 3 families comfortably. I sat on Ranger for several minutes, just staring, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew about property boundaries and legal rights and basic geography of my own land. House was beautiful. Authentic Idaho architecture with hand-peeled logs and river rock foundation looking like they'd been there for decades. But according to my GPS, we were standing nearly 200 yards inside Crawford property line, an exact spot where my grandfather had built his hunting cabin 80 years earlier. Construction crew was wrapping up for day fling, loading tools into pickup trucks with efficient movements of professionals who'd been working together for months. One of Ryan Mitchell's sons noticed me sitting there on horseback. Walked over with casual friendliness, characterizing rural social interaction. He seemed genuinely puzzled when I told him this was my property. Pulled out clipboard to show me building permits and survey information authorizing construction on this specific site. Everything looked legitimate. County stamps, inspector signatures, legal descriptions matching coordinates on Victoria's architectural plans, but standing there in country I'd known since childhood, listening to young man explain how his crew had been hired to build cabin on legally surveyed property, I felt first cold touch of real understanding about what had been happening while I sat beside Dad's bed, measuring his life in decreasing doses of consciousness and increasing amounts of morphine. My hand reached for my phone. Sheriff's Department. Right now. Thumb hovering over call button, then I stopped. Hand was shaking. Not from fear, from rage so pure it made my vision narrow. What would I tell them? Someone was building on my property. They'd ask for proof. Documentation. Evidence of ownership that might take weeks to compile while construction continued. And Victoria would know I'd called authorities, would know I was scared enough to involve law enforcement, would adjust strategy accordingly. For first time since this started, I realized how close I was to destroying everything. One wrong move, one premature call, one moment of letting anger override logic. I could blow entire case before I had evidence to make charges stick. I put phone down, took 3 deep breaths, the way Dad used to make me do when I came home, furious from particularly frustrating situations. Started thinking like businessman instead of victim. Confrontation I'd been dreading came sooner than expected. I returned to construction site next morning, this time carrying grandfather's surveying equipment and copies of every property document I could find in Dad's filing cabinet. Crew was already at work. Sound of power tools echoing through timber as they installed what appeared to be handcrafted kitchen cabinets in structure, supposedly a simple cabin. Level of finish work suggested budget exceeding value of most full-sized homes in area. Victoria arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, stepping out of her silver Mercedes with confidence of someone expecting this meeting for weeks. And that's when I first really saw her as more than just voice on phone and papers in mail. She wore a blazer that caught morning sun filtering through pines. Crimson red. Fitted perfectly to her frame, emphasizing her tall, commanding presence. She draped it casually off her shoulders to reveal a black silk blouse with a V-neck that somehow managed to be both professional and deliberately distracting. The vibrant crimson color demanded attention against the forest backdrop, bold, unapologetic, designed to make people remember her. Her pencil skirt matched the black top, cut with a subtle slit that allowed movement without sacrificing the severe professional line. Red patent leather heels clicked against the gravel construction site, completely impractical for mountain terrain. But somehow making a statement about her confidence and control, everything about her appearance screamed calculated precision. Money and power wrapped in suburban respectability. Her auburn hair fell in styled waves just past her shoulders, catching the light when she moved her head. Professional, but soft enough to seem approachable. And those lips glossed in the same deep crimson as her blazer formed words designed to undermine my certainty before she'd even opened her briefcase. "Daniel," she said warmly, genuine sympathy in voice. "I've been hoping we'd have chance to discuss this directly, rather than letting confusion create unnecessary tension between neighbors." She carried leather briefcase that looked expensive enough to feed family for months. Everything about her suggested competence, professionalism, kind of preparation coming from knowing exactly what questions would be asked and having thoroughly researched answers. She greeted me with what seemed like authentic warmth, expressing condolences for Dad's death, acknowledging how difficult this period must be. Her sympathy seemed real, which somehow made conversation that followed even more unsettling. This wasn't some city slicker trying to run con on country folks. This was sophisticated legal professional who understood exactly what she was doing. had prepared for this confrontation with thoroughness of someone arguing case before state Supreme Court. I understand you have concerns about property boundaries, she said, opening briefcase to reveal perfectly organized files with color-coded tabs and official county letterheads. Her tone was reasonable, almost apologetic, as if boundary dispute was simply bureaucratic misunderstanding that could be resolved through honest conversation between reasonable people. She opened briefcase and set small stack of documents on tailgate of my truck, neat and deliberate, like she'd rehearsed the order. Certified survey, approved permits with county stamps, copy of George Patterson's old notes about uncertainty near creek. She didn't need thick binder to make her point, only needed few pages sounding official enough to make tired man doubt his own map. The issue? Victoria explained. Voice carrying patient authority. Involves discrepancy in original survey work completed in 1983 by George Patterson. He noted it himself in field report. She pointed to photocopied document showing George's careful notation about uncertainty regarding creekside boundary. Modern GPS technology has allowed us to resolve that uncertainty with much greater precision. She produced side-by-side comparison of original survey map and current GPS measurements, highlighting strip of land approximately 2.3 acres in size where two surveys disagreed. According to GPS coordinates, boundary ran along creek bed itself. According to physical markers in place for 40 years, boundary was located approximately 70 yards, closer to my house, which would place construction site entirely on Victoria's property. I've been practicing real estate law for 28 years, she continued, specializing in boundary disputes and property acquisition. I understand how confusing this must be, especially given everything you've been dealing with recently. Documents looked absolutely legitimate. County stamps, inspector signatures, legal descriptions written in precise language characterizing official property records. But most disturbing document was George Patterson's original field notes, which Victoria had apparently obtained through public records request. George's handwritten comments about measurement uncertainty were clear enough. His notation about possible discrepancy requiring future verification provided exactly kind of legal ambiguity supporting competing property claims. Under Idaho law, she explained, adverse possession claims can be established through open, notorious, and continuous use of disputed property for 5 years, provided claimant also pays property taxes on disputed area. She paused, letting that sink in. But in this case, boundary uncertainty means adverse possession isn't necessary. I'm simply building on property that modern surveying technology has confirmed belongs to me according to original legal description. She offered what she called goodwill settlement, $20,000 for any inconvenience I might have experienced, plus agreement formalizing boundary correction and eliminating future confusion. I realize this may feel sudden, she said, those crimson lips forming sympathetic smile, but I think you'll find that resolving this matter quickly will be less expensive and less stressful than allowing it to develop into formal legal dispute. Implied threat was clear enough. Victoria had financial resources, legal expertise, documentary evidence to make this extremely expensive for anyone challenging her position. She knew I was drowning in medical debt, knew I couldn't afford competent legal representation, knew emotional exhaustion of past year had left me in no condition to fight sophisticated legal battle against someone who made their living winning exactly this kind of dispute. But something was off. Small things most people wouldn't notice. Her right hand kept touching her throat. Nervous tick I'd never seen before in our previous interactions. 3 times in 5 minutes. The blazer hung slightly wrong on left shoulder. Not much, just enough. When she thought I wasn't looking, she bit inside of her cheek. Breathing was shallow, quick, kind that comes before panic sets in. These weren't movements of someone in complete control. These were movements of someone barely holding on. I asked for time to review her documents and consult with attorney, which seemed reasonable enough. She couldn't object without appearing unreasonable herself. She agreed to suspend construction for 72 hours while I verified her legal position, though she made clear any extended delay would create scheduling problems with crew and supply deliveries arranged months in advance. That afternoon, I drove to County Courthouse in Sandpoint, determined to understand how someone could build house on my land with legitimate permits and professional surveys. Clerk who helped me access property records was sympathetic but not particularly surprised. Boundary disputes were common enough in mountain country, where original surveys had often been conducted under difficult conditions with primitive equipment. Important thing, she said, was to resolve disagreements before they became expensive legal battles, enriching lawyers more than property owners. Records confirmed everything Victoria had told me. Her building permits were legitimate. Surveys conducted by licensed professionals. Legal descriptions matched coordinates specified in county planning office approval letters. But comparing her modern GPS survey to my family's original deed revealed heart of problem. Two different interpretations of same boundary description, each supporting different conclusion about where my property actually ended. I spent evening walking disputed area with grandfather's surveying equipment, looking for original boundary markers in place since 50s. Some were still visible. Metal stakes driven deep enough to survive decades of weather and forest growth. But others had apparently been moved or removed entirely, creating gaps in physical evidence that could support either interpretation of boundary line using borrowed metal detector. I found what appeared to be original survey markers buried several inches underground, approximately 25 yards from where Victoria's survey showed current boundary. These markers were older and cruder than modern stakes, marking her survey line, but consistent with kind of simple iron pins county surveyors had used in mid-20th century. Pattern became clear as I mapped buried markers against Victoria's current survey. Someone had systematically removed or relocated original boundary markers, replacing them with new stakes, supporting different interpretation of where my property ended. Work had been done carefully and professionally, but evidence of manipulation was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. That evening, as I sat in kitchen trying to understand how Seattle attorney had managed to steal more than 2 acres using legitimate surveys and legal permits. Phone rang. Victoria's voice was as professional and courteous as it had been that morning, but message was considerably more direct. "I've been thinking about our conversation today," she said, "and I realize $20,000 may not adequately compensate you for confusion this boundary correction has created. I'm prepared to offer $35,000 to settle this matter quickly and amicably." She paused. "I think you'll find that's considerably more generous than what you might expect from lengthy legal battle that you frankly can't afford to win." Calculation in her voice was unmistakable. She had timed every aspect of this theft to exploit my grief, my debt, my isolation. George Patterson answered phone on third ring, voice carrying careful precision of someone who'd spent 52 years measuring world in exact increments. At 79, he remained sharp enough to remember details from surveys he'd completed decades earlier, more than willing to discuss boundary work he'd done on my property back in '83. What he told me during that hour-long conversation changed everything I thought I understood about Victoria's legal position. Winter of '83 had been brutal, even by Idaho standards, temperatures staying below zero for weeks, snowfall breaking records throughout region. George's crew had been working under conditions pushing both equipment and human endurance to limits. "We did best we could with what we had," he explained. But GPS technology was still military only back then. We were using compass readings, chain measurements, and landmarks that sometimes got buried under 6 feet of snow. His field notes about measurement uncertainty weren't admissions of incompetence. They were professional disclaimers any honest surveyor would include when working under difficult conditions. More importantly, George remembered specific area where Victoria was claiming boundary confusion. That creekside section was clearly marked. He said, "I remember specifically because your grandfather insisted on being present when we set those markers. He wanted to make sure fishing holes stayed on Crawford property." George's recollections directly contradicted Victoria's interpretation of survey uncertainty. According to his memory, boundary markers he'd placed were intended to be permanent. Their location verified through multiple measurements taking into account creek's seasonal water levels. If those markers had been moved, it wasn't because of survey error. It was because someone had deliberately relocated them to create appearance of boundary confusion. My research into Idaho adverse possession law revealed additional problems with Victoria's legal strategy. While true that 5 years of open and notorious use could establish property rights, use had to be genuinely adverse to original owners' interests. Victoria's claim that she'd been paying property taxes on disputed area was easily verifiable through county records. Quick check revealed no such payments had been made. Her legal position was considerably weaker than her confident presentation suggested. Sarah Collins had been following situation with protective concern of someone who'd spent months helping our family navigate medical crisis. She wasn't about to watch quietly while Victoria tried to steal land from grieving neighbor. She contacted Jim Walsh at the Bonner County Daily Bee, weekly newspaper serving our rural community. Convinced him story deserved attention. Seattle lawyer builds mansion on timber family's land while owner cares for dying father was exactly kind of David versus Goliath narrative. Small town newspapers love. Article appeared Thursday morning with headline "Attorney Builds on Neighbor's Timber Property," accompanied by photographs starkly illustrating scope of Victoria's construction project. Contrast between luxury mountain home rising in timber and my family's modest ranch house told story more effectively than any legal documentation. Within hours of paper hitting newsstands, my phone began ringing. Calls from neighbors, church members, longtime family friends outraged by what they saw as calculated exploitation of someone during most vulnerable period. Community response was immediate and overwhelming. By Friday afternoon, Mary Peterson at First Baptist Church had organized legal defense fund raising $6,000 in first 8 hours. Volunteer fire department committed weekend barbecue proceeds to cause. Local businesses posted donation jars next to cash registers. Timber operators who rarely had spare money began dropping off checks representing real sacrifice. Within a week, fund had reached $16,000, enough to hire competent legal representation for first time since crisis began. Regional television news picked up story by Monday, sending crew from Spokane to interview both parties and film disputed property. Victoria's media appearance was polished and professional, emphasizing legitimate survey work and proper building permits, presenting herself as someone careful to follow all legal requirements before beginning construction. She expressed sympathy for my situation, but maintained property boundaries needed to be based on accurate surveys rather than emotional attachments to family land. My own interview was considerably less polished, still raw from grief. Exhausted by months of crisis management, Unprepared for hostile questioning television reporters use to create dramatic content. But what came through clearly was authentic emotion of someone who'd inherited land representing 3 generations of family history. Watching it disappear through legal manipulations designed to exploit rural families lacking sophisticated legal resources, public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive of my position. Story resonated with viewers understanding vulnerability of rural property owners confronted by urban legal professionals with superior resources and specialized knowledge. Comments on news stations' website and social media reflected genuine anger at what appeared to be calculated theft disguised as boundary dispute. Breakthrough transforming case from he said, she said dispute into clear evidence of systematic fraud came from unexpected source. Jake Mitchell, 17-year-old son of contractor Victoria, had hired was enthusiastic drone pilot who'd been documenting construction project as photography hobby. His footage captured over several months provided aerial timeline showing exactly when and how construction had encroached into clearly disputed territory. Drone videos revealed Victoria's construction had begun on what appeared to be her legitimate property, but had gradually expanded into areas any reasonable interpretation would place on Crawford land. Footage showed workers removing and relocating survey markers, expanding building footprint beyond original architectural plans, conducting work extending far beyond cabin, described in building permits. Jake's inadvertent documentation provided objective evidence transforming complex legal dispute into clear case of property theft. Armed with new evidence and sufficient funds to hire professional help, I contacted Michael Anderson, attorney from Coeur d'Alene, specializing in property disputes, had reputation for representing rural landowners against better-funded opponents. Michael reviewed drone footage, George Patterson's recollections, and discrepancies between Victoria's building permits and actual construction. Concluded we had grounds for both civil and criminal complaints. He also arranged professional survey by independent firm using most advanced GPS technology available. Results confirmed what George had remembered and what Jake's drone footage documented. Victoria's construction extended nearly 50 yards into Crawford property, encompassing land never subject to legitimate boundary disputes. Legal momentum was building in our favor when Victoria's strategy shifted dramatically. Instead of continuing negotiations or responding to new evidence, she hired high-powered law firm from Boise, filed motion for summary judgment forcing dispute into federal court under Idaho's adverse possession statutes. Motion demanded I prove ownership of disputed property within 30 days or accept court's determination that Victoria's construction had been legitimate. Calculated gamble designed to exploit exactly kind of financial and legal disadvantages, making me vulnerable in first place. Michael Anderson's decision to take case pro bono changed everything about our legal position. Respected property attorney with 32 years experience. He brought strategic thinking and courtroom credibility. Victoria's expensive Boise firm would have to respect evidence package we compiled over following 2 weeks was comprehensive enough to support both civil and criminal charges. Jake Mitchell's drone footage provided visual documentation. George Patterson's testimony contradicted Victoria's claims. Buried boundary markers I'd discovered proved original survey stakes had been systematically moved. Michael recruited expert witnesses whose credentials would be difficult to challenge. Dr. Elena Martinez from University of Idaho's surveying program reviewed GPS data, confirming modern technology supported George Patterson's original determinations rather than Victoria's reinterpretation. James Wilson, retired FBI forensic accountant, analyzed Victoria's financial records, identified patterns consistent with systematic property speculation rather than good faith boundary confusion. Our legal strategy focused on proving intentional fraud rather than allowing case to become bogged down in technical disputes about survey methodology. Michael understood juries respond to clear narratives about right and wrong more effectively than complex arguments about property law. Media attention surrounding case expanded when Idaho Public Television produced a segment about property rights and rural land disputes featuring our story. National property rights organizations began following the case, recognizing potential impact on rural land ownership throughout western states. Discovery process revealed calculated nature of Victoria's strategy in devastating detail. Court-ordered subpoenas exposed pattern of property speculation, including similar boundary disputes in Oregon and Montana. Her investment portfolio included properties in 8 states, most acquired through legal challenges to existing ownership claims. More damaging were communications between Victoria and her advisors revealing extensive research into my family's financial situation and emotional vulnerability. Email correspondence dating back to November discussed opportunity created by Dad's terminal illness. Text messages with real estate advisor explicitly referenced exploiting family crisis and timing acquisition during maximum vulnerability. These communications transformed complex legal dispute into clear evidence of premeditated theft from grieving neighbor. Victoria's response to mounting legal pressure was accelerating timeline for establishing physical possession. In early July, she moved furniture into luxury cabin, claiming settled residence, strengthening adverse possession claims. Her settlement offers kept climbing as our evidence sharpened. What started as $20,000 swelled to $50,000, then $75,000. Michael told me same thing every time. If she truly believed she owned that land, she wouldn't be trying so hard to purchase your agreement. Final escalation came when Victoria's attorney filed for preliminary injunction preventing me from accessing disputed property. Motion claimed my presence created safety hazards and interfered with Victoria's legitimate use of property she claimed to own. Judge Patricia Hansen scheduled emergency hearing to address Victoria's injunction motion. Idaho native with 30 years judicial experience. She had reputation for no-nonsense case management. Her decision to expedite hearing suggested she recognized urgency of resolving Victoria's aggressive tactics. Community support intensified as hearing date approached. Local businesses posted signs. Church groups organized prayer vigils. Neighboring timber operators offered to testify. Volunteer fire department announced plans to attend hearing in uniform. Night before hearing, I walked disputed property one final time. Following creek my grandfather had used to establish original boundary 75 years earlier, Victoria's luxury cabin dominated meadow where 3 generations of my family had camped and fished. Standing there in gathering darkness, I understood preliminary hearing would determine whether legal system could distinguish between legitimate disputes and calculated exploitation of grieving families. Federal courthouse in Coeur d'Alene filled beyond capacity morning of emergency hearing. Spectators spilling into hallway. Reporters setting up equipment. What had begun as property dispute between neighbors had evolved into test of whether sophisticated legal manipulation could triumph over rural justice. Victoria stood with her attorneys near front. That crimson blazer catching courthouse lighting, black silk blouse beneath, red heels clicking. Everything about her appearance screamed control and confidence. But something was different. Her right hand kept returning to that same spot at her collarbone, over and over. That nervous tell I'd noticed during our first confrontation. The blazer hung slightly crooked. When she thought no one was watching, she bit inside of her cheek. Small cracks in otherwise perfect facade. Behind me, neighbors tried to keep voices down. Row of volunteer firefighters in dress uniforms sat with hats in laps. Jake Mitchell clutched hard case with his drone and laptop. Leg bouncing nervously, Michael leaned over. "Remember, this isn't the trial. All we need today is time and fair look at facts." Judge Patricia Hansen entered with brisk efficiency, Idaho native who understood timber country. Her first ruling set tone for everything that followed. The preliminary injunction motion is denied. She announced. Moreover, given conflicting survey evidence and serious questions about integrity of boundary markers, this court is ordering independent professional survey by court-appointed expert until completed. Both parties will have equal access to disputed property. Victoria's legal team had clearly expected different outcome. But Judge Hansen was more interested in facts than legal technicalities. Court-appointed survey took 2 weeks using GPS technology, establishing boundaries within inches. Results vindicated everything George Patterson had remembered and Jake's drone footage suggested. Victoria's luxury cabin extended 43 yards into Crawford property, encompassing land never subject to legitimate boundary disputes. Main trial began in August, with jury selection reflecting rural character of district. George Patterson's testimony provided foundation for our case. At 79, he commanded attention through simple authority of someone who'd measured Idaho land for 52 years. "I remember that particular section clearly," George testified, "because Daniel's grandfather insisted on being present when we set markers. He wanted to make sure family fishing holes stayed on Crawford property. There was no confusion about where that boundary ran." Jake Mitchell's drone footage provided visual evidence transforming complex legal arguments into simple courtroom reality. Aerial timeline showed Victoria's construction gradually expanding beyond original permits into areas clearly belonging to Crawford property. When it was my turn to take stand, I described those final months with Dad. The medication schedules, the bills, the slow collapse of ordinary life. Michael asked what kept me from riding out to check the property sooner. I looked at jury. I was trying to keep my father from dying in pain. I thought land could wait. Most devastating evidence came from Victoria's own communications, revealed through discovery. Email correspondence showed extensive research into my family's financial situation and Dad's prognosis. Text messages discussed timing property acquisition to exploit maximum vulnerability. Under Michael's questioning, Victoria was forced to admit researching my family's medical expenses, acknowledging investigation into timing of Dad's illness, and confirming decision to accelerate construction during period when I was least able to monitor back sections. Her inability to explain moved survey markers proved equally damaging. When presented with buried boundary stakes I'd discovered, she claimed no knowledge of how original markers had been removed. Jury deliberation lasted less than 4 hours. Verdict stripped Victoria of everything she'd tried to steal and imposed consequences following her for rest of professional life. Luxury cabin, valued at $495,000, was awarded to me as compensation. Compensatory damages of $108,000 covered legal fees. Punitive damages of $210,000 reflected jury's conclusion that Victoria's actions represented intentional exploitation of grieving family. Judge Hansen ordered formal investigation into Victoria's professional conduct, noting evidence suggested pattern of using legal expertise to exploit rural property owners. Criminal referral opened possibility of fraud charges. Victoria's reaction to verdict provided final dramatic moment. As Judge Hansen read award amounts, Victoria's composure collapsed entirely. She began shouting about rural prejudice and legal incompetence. Her attorney's attempts to quiet her only intensified outburst, creating courtroom scene, destroying professional reputations permanently. Walking out of courthouse that afternoon, surrounded by supporters, I felt something deeper than simple victory. Legal system had worked exactly as designed, protecting ordinary families from exploitation and holding sophisticated criminals accountable. 6 months after verdict, Victoria Brennan's legal empire had collapsed completely. Criminal charges resulted in 22-month suspended sentence contingent on full restitution. More devastating was permanent disbarment, ending legal career and triggering malpractice suits from previous clients. Washington State Bar Association's investigation revealed Victoria had used nearly identical strategies in Oregon and Montana, targeting rural families during crisis periods. By winter, she declared personal bankruptcy and relocated to California. Luxury cabin became Crawford Family Retreat, a facility where relatives could gather for reunions and extended visits. Irony wasn't lost on anyone. Victoria's attempt to steal family land had resulted in creating facility serving Crawford family for decades. Retreat's first major event was memorial service for Dad, held on anniversary of his death in Meadow, where he'd loved to fish. Sarah Collins organized gathering, drawing nearly 400 people. Service concluded with dedication of memorial garden planted with Dad's favorite wildflowers. Property boundaries were permanently established through stone monuments, replacing survey stakes Victoria had manipulated. Each marker engraved with Crawford family name and dates of legal ownership. Installation ceremony became annual Property Rights Day, designed to educate rural landowners about protecting property from sophisticated legal challenges. My transformation through legal battle surprised everyone. Necessity of understanding property law had given me expertise other rural landowners sought when facing similar challenges. County appointed me to volunteer position reviewing boundary disputes. I started speaking at agricultural conferences about protecting family land. Jake Mitchell, whose drone footage provided evidence transforming our case, received scholarship to University of Idaho's surveying program, funded by supporters who'd followed legal battle. Retreat hosted its first family reunion during summer following trial, bringing together Crawford relatives scattered by distance. Children learned to fish in creek defining our property boundaries, while parents shared stories about legal battle preserving family land. Standing on deck of what had once been Victoria's stolen mansion, watching 3 generations gather in Meadow, where Dad had taught me to appreciate timber life. I felt satisfaction going beyond simple legal victory. Final monument to Dad's memory was stone bench placed beside creek where he'd love to sit during summer evenings. Positioned to overlook retreat and mountain views. Inscription read simply, Thomas Crawford, 1952 to 2024. He taught us that some lines don't move. 8 months after verdict, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. As sun set behind mountains, witnessing 3 generations of Crawford family history, I could hear voices from Retreat, where my sister's family was spending weak children's laughter mixed with adult conversation. Victoria had tried to steal this land during our family's darkest hour, but her theft had ultimately created something she never could have anticipated. Justice isn't just about winning in court. It's about protecting what matters most, and making sure the people who come after us have the same opportunities we inherited.